Hi ladies and gentlemen, this is Makalesi, and I'm going to try to make you guys a video, and I'm going to make it as interesting as possible because I'm going to be getting into the Hebrew alphabets, and so I hope you guys will stick with me. I know I'm going to be using a lot of, just a couple, not a lot, maybe 3 or 4 Bible verses to just so you guys can understand the translation of what the mighty's name, Eloheem, Jehovah, Adonai Eloheem, basically the translation means. But for me to do that, I kind of have to show you guys a little bit of Hebrew alphabets, and I got to show you the translation in the King James Version, and then kind of give you guys like the dilemma that was happening where it went from one translation to another. And this is good because it'll give you guys a good understanding, a little bit of Hebrew alphabets. I'm not going to get too into it. I'm just going to get down to basically straight to the point. And I also want to go ahead and give you guys the name that is written in Hebrew, and then correlate that to the tree of life, Kabbalah tree of life. And I also want to correlate that to, you know, when they said man was made in the image of God. But realize, you know, I had someone ask me, what is the Kabbalah tree of life? Now that's a very, very difficult question to ask because it's multi-layers. For one, it goes from the evolution of consciousness from a person. It can go from the evolution of humans. It can go into the microcosms of the universe, and it can also go into psychology of your consciousness. But what happens is there's definitely a lot of great information out there, so I highly recommend to people to get into it, because a lot of times when you're dealing with trying to evolve, it's better for people to kind of ponder and decode things on their own. And even if you don't get things, just like listen to it and then just put it in a file maybe for later, and then eventually the puzzles will be put together. So in this video, I primarily want to talk about, you know, the name of Eloheem, Jehovah, but at the same, and then in conjunction with the Hebrew alphabets. But then I also want to go ahead and talk about this in regards to the, you know, the golden dawns with their lesser banishing rituals, and then also the elements, and just kind of do a little bit of decoding for you guys, so hopefully initiate you guys into maybe wanting to learn more about this on your own. So first of all, what we have here is this right here is what you would call the alphabet for the Hebrew Bible, or the Hebrew alphabet of what God said his name was, the mighty all God. Now, when you look at it, you have to realize that when you're looking at the Hebrew alphabet, as opposed to the regular English alphabet, they go from the left to the right. Now this right here is the alphabet Yud, which is the one to the left. The first one kind of looks like a little hand. Ve, Hev, He. So when you look at this is technically saying God said his name in Hebrew was Yehovah. Now to go ahead and show you this in Hebrew, I got to show you guys some verse, because this is when we go into Exodus chapter 3 verse 15, and then we go into Exodus chapter 20 verse 6. And the reason why I want to show you chapter 3 verse 15 and chapter 20 verse 6 is because, one, this is the time when the Lord, or the mighty all, gave his name, and then chapter 20 when he gave a warning, please do not use my name in vain. Now if you realize, on the right hand side you have the translation in English, where instead of saying Jehovah or Eloheem, they say the Lord. So realize that if you're looking at the King James Bible, you realize the word Lord is written there approximately 6,519 times. Now I highlighted here a Lord on the right hand side, so you can see the translation on the left is basically saying Yehovah, which is basically the Hebrew way of saying the all great mighty. So let's go ahead and look at this. So this is basically when we learn about the name of the Lord, right, or the mighty all. So it says, and God said moreover unto Moses, thus shalt say unto the children of Israel, the Lord, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial until all generations. So that was interesting because the Lord, they said Lord here, but technically he said a name, which is Jehovah, which is here on the left. But then it created a dilemma because then it said here on Exodus 20, verse 6, it says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." So then here I highlighted Lord because once again he said the Lord again, but then he gives a warning in which says, "Do not take my name in vain." So then this created a dilemma because he kind of said, okay, by the way, this is my name, Jehovah, which they translate as Lord in the King James Bible. But then there is a warning saying, do not take my name in vain. So what happened was they had this dilemma. They actually had two dilemmas where they didn't know how to say this person's name with technically saying it because they didn't want to be punished in essence. So then they said, okay, well, how could we write this Bible and say his name without saying it? So then that's when they realized back in the days that they had what you would call a word. There's a word called Adonai. And basically Adonai basically means master or sovereign ruler. So they said, well, we could use the word Adonai. However, if we use the word Adonai, we can't ever use that name again because people are going to get confused if, like, do we mean the Lord or do we mean just a sovereign ruler? So then they decided, okay, so people don't get confused, we'll say Adonai Eloheem. So by saying Adonai Eloheem, you're basically saying sovereign ruler or master. Eloheem basically means mighty, creative rulership over sovereignty. So they say, okay, so if we could say Adonai in the Torah, but when we say Adonai Eloheem, that is basically validating we're talking about the Lord. So therefore, they found that's when they had a solution. So here I have here. So here they have, if you look at the top, it said Yehovah, which is the name in Hebrew. But like if you look at my first dilemma, it says we can't say the name of God in vain. How do we translate without actually saying his name? So the solution, replace it with Adonai Eloheem. So there you go. So every time they would say Lord, basically in the King James Bible, they would say Adonai Eloheem, which basically means like the sovereign, mighty God, ruler with creative rulership and sovereignty. But then they had a second dilemma because they said, okay, well, there is the verse when he does say his name, technically, we can't just make up that name because we said it so many times. So then the second dilemma was, how do we spell God's name, which is YHWH? And the reason why it's YHWH is basically all you're taking is the first vowel, YHVH. Some people say IHVH, some people say IHWH, but technically it's the same thing. Because what you're doing is you're translating the alphabets Yehovah into English, and what they do is they just take the first constant. So it's going to be YHVH or YHWH. So they said, well, how do we spell God's name if we cannot say his name in vain in the Torah? So what they did is they decided that they're going to go ahead and use the vowel of Adonai. But the vowels in Adonai, if you look at that, is A, O, A. They're not including the Y. So they said, well, what we could do is because he does technically say his name, we're going to go ahead and say the name, Yehovah, but we're going to put the vowels of Adonai in between each consonant or in between each letter or in between each tetragrammation. And for those who are not sure what a tetragrammation is, it's basically like a four constant, basically like what you would call just a constant. It's just basically just the letters. They said what we'll do is we'll say the name, but we'll put vowels of Adonai in between, so therefore we're saying it, but we're saying it in a different way. So that's when you have YHWA, but then you put AOA in between, and then you get Y. Let's look at this. You get YAHOWAH. So what I did is I used the original, making it all caps, so it's YHWH. I used the vowels that they put in between the name as A-O-A. So when you translate that, it says Yahweh. So technically, when they tried to say it, because they didn't want to use his name in vain, they said, well, we'll just say, instead of say Yehovah, we'll say Yahweh. So when you translate Yahweh into from the Torah to the Bible, then you can understand how you got the name Jehovah. Because Yahweh can also mean Yahweh. Sometimes people say Jehovah. But technically, the real word is Yehovah. They didn't want to do what I do, which is saying it. They basically wanted to go ahead and protect it because they didn't want to say it in vain. So then you could go ahead and say, okay, well, now that we know that Jehovah is basically the safe way of saying Yehovah, what exactly does Yehovah means? Now, this is where we're going to get into the concept of the elements. Because realizing, I made a video talking about high magic and the elements and things of that nature. But realize that when you're talking about the elements, you're also talking about the tree of life. So here we have the tree of life. You have kether, which is already at the top. You have chokmah, you have bina, da'at, chesed, gebereh, tabarit, nazak, hud, yesod, and malkuth. Now, the tree of life can be interpreted in so many ways. There's really not one way to describe it. It could be something that helps you with your subconsciousness. People can say this is like the Jacob ladder where we're on malkuth. You want to raise your consciousness and your vibration up. You want to also use a kether, pulling energy down to malkuth into your physical, or you want to use your malkuth, your physical body, on malkuth or earth higher. But at the same time, there is different variations of the tree of life that is associated with the elements. And realizing that when you're working with the elements, it's important to understand because you can work with the elements to balance yourself, to balance your organs, and also to try to balance the elements within you. So here I have here Yod, a picture, and if you look at this picture, you'll notice that if you put Yehovah stacked on top of each other, because technically if you turn it sideways, we're looking at it from the left to the right, but if you put Yehovah stacked on top of each other, it kind of looks like a man. And then they would say, he said, I created man in my image. So here we have the head, which kind of looks like Yod. You have He, which kind of looks like the shoulder and the arms. Ve, which kind of looks like the spinal. And He, which kind of looks like the legs and the hips. So when you look at that, you're like, okay, well, that's kind of an interesting symbology. But then we're going to take it a little bit step further. And then we're going to look at this little picture here, where we're going to go ahead and break it down by the elements. So here we have, here the tree of life, which I was talking about earlier. And we're going to go ahead and talk about this from the elements. And we're going to talk this more about the elements within you as opposed to the cosmos. So when you're dealing with Yod, you're dealing with kether and chokmah, which is the purple part of this diagram. If you look in the middle of it, the tree of life, which is circled in purple. And basically, that's dealing with the life force, which is associated with fire. And that's more like this life force that's very powerful, very expansive. It's very hard to get to. It's people for the most part are not. It's really, that's like high level. And then you have here Binah, which is the creative impulses. It's kind of like your intuition, that those emotions, that creative, that kind of imagination part of your that creates things. You get the impulses from the life force into you through these creative impulses. And now, of course, I'm talking to you as an individual. And then what you have here is then you have, so that's He, and then you have Vev, which is these little yellow parts. The yellow parts is which is called Gebereh, Chesed, Tabarit, Hud, Nazak, and Yosed. Now, if you've been watching my videos, I was talking about Yosed being associated with the moon, which is also associated with the astral plane, which is associated with your imagination and pulling things into the physical. Well, Vev is associated with wind, which is a plane of ideas, plane of imagination. That's where you get you see, you create things. And then what you have here finally is He, which is the material plane, which is also associated with her earth. So when you look at this, in essence, Yehovah is talking about the different elements. There's 4 elements, and basically working with the life force through creative impulses in the plane of idea and manifesting it on the physical realm. But at the same time, this is also associated with the elemental kingdoms that were manifested prior to becoming into the physical realm of malkuth. So first you have the fire kingdom, and then you have the water kingdom, and then you have the wind kingdom, and then you have the earth kingdom. So then we have here, I'm going to show you guys some different verses from Leviticus chapter 22. And this is interesting because, I talked about the elements, which is talking about the different variations of manifestation in the physical. That can also work with your consciousness. But then at the same time, when we look at the tree of life, you can look at this in 2 different ways. You could talk about, okay, you are basically on the physical realm, you're physical in malkuth, which is earth, and then maybe you want to transcend this physical embodiment that many people can say you're trapped in the physical realm. So what you have to do is you have to overcome the physical plane, and then you have to overcome the plane of ideas by manifesting only good ideas, and then really be in tune with creative impulses through theurgy and things of that nature, and then get really in tune with the life force. So when you look at that, you can say Yehovah is also showing you that basically you have to get in control of the material plane, and then get in control of your ideas, understand the creative impulses, and be able to yield the life force. Now, those of you who are familiar with the tarot cards will understand that the tarot cards also is talking in different variations of the elements. The wand is fire, the water is cup, the wind is air, the earth is the pentacle. Now, if you talk about the pentacle, you realize that the pentacle looks like this. And the pentacle basically here's a picture of a pentacle. It has a spirit on the top. It has water, air, earth, and fire. And basically what happens is, if you invoke all 4 elements naturally and correctly, the spirit will naturally come as a ramification of you invoking these elements. So therefore, when a lot of times people do the Kabbalah cross, which in Catholic they call it the sign of the cross, when you're kind of touching your forehead, your heart, your right shoulder, and then your left shoulder. What you're doing is you're invoking the elements, which is air, water, fire, and earth. Now, when people do the Kabbalah cross, they usually say Atah, touching their third eye. They go Atah malkuth, which is their heart. Atah malkuth. Vivagre, Vatigala. Vivagre is your right, Vatigala is your left. And basically what they're doing is they're invoking the spirits by invoking some of the Hebrew names that, a lot of times people can say is a magical alphabet. Just like we can say Yehovah, that's why it has a pronounced spiritual meaning behind it. So they say, well, don't invoke the name unless you're not worthy or you're not really working with the elements, because most of the times when you're saying Yehovah, you are trying to balance your energies. So they say, don't use my name in vain. So here you have Leviticus chapter 22, and it has some verses, and this is basically him talking about offerings. So in verse 22 he says, and whosoever bringeth the sacrifice of peace, offering unto the Lord in fulfillment of a vow, clearly uttered, or for a free will offering of the herd of the flock, it shall be perfect to be accepted. There shall be no blemish therein. Blind or broken or maimed or having a yen or scabbed or scurry, ye shall not offer these unto the Lord, nor make an offering by fire upon the altar unto the Lord. So basically what he's saying here is to have here Lord, because that's what they called him in the King James Bible, but I have here it's Yehovah. So basically we know here that he's basically saying he likes offering, but he doesn't want people using the elements, things like fire, wind, water, from the environment. He basically wants you to invoke it to yourself. So that's when you have, the if those are familiar with the Golden Dawn, know that they do what you would call the Lesser Banishing Ritual, and what times people call LBR. Lesser Banishing Ritual basically is L stands for lesser, B, banishing rituals, and all you're doing is you're evoking the elements, and what you're doing is, usually you do a Kabbalah cross, you do it in the east, preferably in the morning, and you try to invoke the different elements, and you say, like, if those who do the Golden Dawn would get familiar with, oh, do we say that? Jehovah. And what happens is, when you're doing that, what you want to do is you basically want to banish energy to set yourself to obtain higher energy. Because after you do the LBR, the Lesser Banishing Rituals, for a couple of months or so, then you want to do the LIPR, which is a Lesser Invoking Pentagram Rituals. And what you're doing from there is just like the Tree of Life, is you're trying to invoke the elements from Kether, Chokmah, Binah, Chesed, Tabarith, Nazak, all of those hood into yourself. So you have to first cleanse yourself before you invoke it. So therefore, that's when you are working with the elements, with the pentagram, you would realize that each point is associated with the element, just as there's different points associated with the tarot cards, just as there is different elements associated with the parts of the Tree of Life. So when you realize that, okay, so what you're doing technically is you want to go ahead and cleanse yourself, and then you also want to invoke. Now, that's basically where I'm going to leave off right now, because I don't want to get too into it. So in essence, what this video is about is just breaking down that Yehovah is basically the name of God in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah, before it got translated. Obviously, they've got uncomfortable with having the name being said, because it said, do not use my name in vain. You have to be able to just do this without perverting it, basically. So then they came up with the translation of Adonai Eloheem, and then when it came to actually saying the name, they said that they're going to use the vowels in Adonai and put it in, Yehovah, which is YHVH or YHWH, and therefore you get Yahweh, and Eloheem. And then when you translate that into the King James Version, they always say Lord, or sometimes with the Jehovah or the English Protestants, they will say Jehovah or Yahweh Elohim. But realizing that it does go a little bit further, which I'm not going to get further into, the Hebrew alphabet does invoke different energies because it is a magical alphabet, and therefore they say do not invoke it if you do not have the right intentions. At the same time, this corresponds with the Tree of Life, which also corresponds with you getting out of malkuth, evolving yourself, or invoking energies to come down, which is also associated with the Golden Dawn, LBR, LIPR, and then at the same time, a fuller understanding of how there's different lot of spirituality out there, but they're all related if you just go further back in history. So that's my video. Hope you liked it, and I'll see you in my next.